Today we're going to make shepherd's pie, otherwise known as cottage pie. Traditionally this is made with beef or lamb, but today we're going to make a healthier option using ground turkey. So we're going to begin with our mashed potato topping, which we're going to use Idaho potatoes to make this recipe. So we'll begin with our Idaho potatoes, and we'll have a garbage bowl at our station. We'll peel our potatoes completely. If there are any eyes on the potatoes or brown spots, you want to remove those as well. And we'll do that till all 7 of them before we start cutting them. So always work in steps on your cutting board. So before we start, we want to clean the cutting board because the skins of the potatoes contain dirt. So we'll just wipe that down, and now we'll get started on our cutting. So we're going to cut these potatoes into half and then into quarters and then down into 1-inch chunks. So we'll continue to do that until all the potatoes have been prepped. We want to make sure that our potatoes are cut into even size so that as they are boiling on the stove, they cook at the same time. Here are our diced potatoes. Now on our stovetop, we're going to take a pot of water. We're going to put it over a nice high flame, and we'll add our potatoes very carefully to that water. We're also wanting to season our water pretty heavily with salt. So I'm going to use about 2 tablespoons of salt. So this way, as our potatoes cook, they really absorb that flavor, that seasoning. Give that a little stir, and we'll leave it here on the stove while we prepare our vegetables. So here we have celery, an onion, a carrot, and a parsnip. We're going to clean our celery and get all that dirt off. And now we'll take our parsnip and we will peel the skin off of the outside. When we're done with that, we'll repeat the same thing with our carrot, keeping our station nice and clean, working over our garbage bowl. So I'm going to peel the carrot. The outside of the carrot and the parsnips usually are very dirty and they're very fibrous, so we don't want that. Now we will trim the top of our onion, and then we'll cut it in half, leaving the root end intact, and we'll peel the skin off the outside. So now let's clean up our cutting board and get started again for our dicing. So we'll just take a paper towel and just wipe that down so it's nice and clean. So our first vegetable that we're going to work with is our onion. So for our onion, I'm going to make horizontal cuts, followed by vertical cuts, and then cross cuts. So I want to keep my hand nice and flat on the top, never curving my fingers, nice and flat so that I can make my cuts nice and evenly. Now we're going to go ahead and hold it together and make our vertical cuts. And then now we'll make our cross cuts. So we want to take our thumb, tuck it in, and we want to curl our fingers. We also want to put 3 fingers around the handle of the knife, and we want to make sure that we're rocking the knife on our cutting board. So when you first start your knife cuts, it can be a little uncomfortable getting into the safe position, but over time you will become more comfortable with it. So here we are with our second half, vertical, horizontal, vertical, and our small dice cross cuts. Now we'll take our celery stalks and trim the top and the bottom, and we're going to take those and slice them in half and make our cross cuts for our small dice. Much of your trimmings, you can save them if you're making chicken stock or any other type of stock in your kitchen. I'm not today, so I'm just going to be getting rid of the trimmings. Now I want to take the top and the bottom of my carrot off, cut it into half. And carrots roll, they're very hard, so I want to create a nice flat, stable surface. And I'm going to make sure that I make my slices, followed by making sticks. And I'll prep all of that. And then from there, I will do my cross cuts. Again, being safe with holding of my knife and curling my hands. Now I have my small dice on my carrot. Okay, so nice even pieces, even sticks, and cross cutting. So originally I was not going to use the whole carrot, but you'll see I'll go back and use all of the carrot in the end. But we're only going to use half of this parsnip. It's a very large piece of vegetable. We're going to trim it from the top and the bottom, and we're going to, again, the same concept, make a nice stable side, make our slices, our sticks, and then our cross cut. So this is a great way to practice your knife cutting skills. Having them in the smaller pieces gives you a nice consistent final texture to your recipe. It allows everything to cook nice and evenly within your recipe. So our parsnip is going to offer a little bit of an earthiness and also a sweet flavor. One other recipe or ingredient you can add to this recipe is green peas. I chose not to because it is not a favorite of my family's, so I just stuck to using this mirepoix with the parsnips added. So here I am just adding in the rest of the carrots. So we have carrots, celery, onions, and parsnips for our flavors for our recipe. So let's get back to the stove where our potatoes have been boiling for about, I would say about 5 to 10 minutes. I want to test them. So when I pierce them with a fork or a knife, as long as it goes in nice and gently without any resistance, I know that my potatoes are tender enough and cooked. So I checked it about, I would say, the 10-minute mark. You may have to go 10, 12 minutes. It just depends on the size of the cuts of your potatoes. Now I'm going to take my potatoes after I've drained them. I'm going to go back into the pot, nice and dry, and I'm going to use a potato masher and mash them while they're over a low to medium flame. And this will continue to dry the potatoes out, get any excess moisture out, so that I can have nice fluffy potatoes. So I'm going to do that over a flame just for a few minutes. And once they've been mashed, I now need to heat some butter and some half and half. So I'm going to take about a stick of butter. There's nothing healthy about this topping. And I'm going to add some half and half. And I'm just going to melt that and get that nice and hot. I'll continue to mash, get all the lumps out of the potatoes while I'm waiting. Season with some salt and pepper. And then once my butter and half is boiling, I'm going to add in a small amount and really mash that in. And I'll add it in stages. If I add too much liquid at once, it's going to be very difficult to mix properly. And if I add too much liquid at once, I may add too much. So I just want to add it in small stages and just make sure I'm getting the right consistency. Nice and fluffy, free of lumps. I'm going to taste if I need to re-season, usually a little bit more salt. And then I'm going to add some sour cream to finish the recipe, which will make it nice and creamy and fluffy and a little tart and really, really delicious. So before we set this aside, we're going to taste and season this one more time. We're going to make sure that the moisture level is proper between the butter, sour cream, and half. We also are going to add a little more salt if needed. Potatoes are very, very bland, so they do need lots of seasoning to really make the flavor pop. So now what we'll do is we will take our mashed potatoes, we're going to put them into a bowl and set them aside. And we're going to want to keep these nice and warm because we need to pipe them on top of our dish when they're nice and warm. So I'm going to just put a little bit of water into that pan, sit the potatoes on top, and cover them. Now for our filling. So we have quite a number of ingredients here for our filling, some that we've already prepared. And one thing that's optional, but I've been using, is the umami flavoring from the Trader Joe's. So it has in it some salt and pepper, onions, ground mustard seed, and then different dried mushroom powders, crushed red pepper, black pepper, and dried thyme. So it really adds some great flavor. So if you have that option to get it or have those ingredients in your house, you can certainly add them to this recipe, or you can leave it out altogether. So I have a Dutch oven pan that I'm going to put on top of the stove. Any large pot will work just fine. I like using a Dutch oven because it really holds on to heat very deeply and helps us to really brown the meat and cook large quantities of food because of the size. But you can do this in a stock pot. So some oil goes in the pan, my ground turkey meat, and then my seasonings will go in. I am going to use my potato masher again. I know I use this a lot in my recipes. And I'm going to just kind of break up that meat, and I'm not going to touch it for a few minutes, and I'm going to allow it to brown. So I am speeding up the video here, and the time is going a little bit quicker, but we want to make sure that we brown the meat. So now we're going to just leave it sitting there, that nice high heat, allowing the caramelization to happen. We'll stir it every few minutes, but we can see now that it's starting to get darker in color. Turkey meat has lots of moisture, so it will release some liquids as it is cooking. So that will cause a little bit of a steaming action to happen. So we really want to make sure that it gets nice and brown by just not moving it for about 3 to 5 minutes. And Then when it is complete, we will strain the meat out from any sort of the cooking liquids into a bowl. We'll set it aside. And then we're going to repeat the process. So I didn't put all of my meat in at once because of that moisture content level. If there's so much moisture in there, it's going to steam and not brown. So this is why I did it in batches. So again, I start off with a little bit of oil, all of my seasoning, salt, pepper, onion, garlic, that mushroom seasoning, some dry thyme. And now I'm going to just cook it every few minutes. I'll give it a little turn, but again, allowing that nice high heat to brown it. And then I'll repeat the same process with my vegetables. So as I'm cooking my vegetables, I'm going to season as well. And if I notice that the bottom of the pan is getting really dark and all those brown bits, which are lots of flavors, I might just give a little splash of chicken stock just to help to release those flavors. Now I'm going to add some Worcestershire sauce to my recipe, and I'll put the meat back in, and then also adding a little more stock. Not that I want a wet or liquidy filling, but I may need to add a little moisture in because the turkey meat is so lean. We want to just make sure that we have a little bit of moisture in there. So we're just adding it in just really to bring everything together, but not to make it floating in the liquid. So the next thing that we'll do is we are going to, as this finishes cooking, we are going to take our Pyrex dish. I like to use my Pyrex dishes when I'm making things like this. Any sort of pan will work. And we're going to take a little bit of butter, and we're just going to coat the bottom of the pan with some butter. And this just adds a little bit of flavor, keeps everything from sticking. So I just like to always coat the bottom of the pan. Just rub that in there. There we go. And the next thing, we'll now scoop our filling over into the pan. So this is a 9x13 pan. You can use a roasting pan, you can use a metal pan, whatever it is that you have available, but something that is shallow and something that you can spread out the filling. So we'll just make sure the filling is flattened in there so it'll make it easier for us to pipe our our potatoes on top. So we want to make a little bit of a decorative edge here. So we're going to use a pastry bag. This is a plastic coated canvas pastry bag. You can use a plastic bag or you can use a Ziploc bag, but I find because of the texture I need to use something stronger. I'm also going to use a pastry tip if I have one, and this will help me give some nice final decorative edge to the piping. So I'm going to use the one all the way to the right. I'm going to pipe my mashed potatoes on top, and you want to make sure that you are evenly distributing it because you want to have enough to cover the top, and if not, just use a little spoon and kind of spread it in there. So now we'll put this into our preheated oven at 375 degrees for about 35 to 45 minutes until nice and golden. So the top will get a nice golden color to it. Our filling will start to bubble. Here's how we'll serve it on our table. And then we'll just very carefully scoop out filling along with the mashed potatoes to serve. I hope you enjoy this nice warm and hearty dish with your family. Enjoy.